The quantum communication array hummed with a low, menacing vibration that seemed to resonate with the tension in the room. Zartok's six-limbed body was perfectly still, a predatory stillness that spoke of centuries of evolutionary hunting instinct. Around him, the most elite assassination team in the Galactic Syndicate waited with a mixture of professional calm and barely contained excitement. The contract displayed on the holographic projector was unlike anything they had ever seen before. A single target, one human military commander. The bounty was so astronomical that it defied conventional understanding. Colonel Emily Reese of Epsilon Prime Colony, a name that seemed unremarkable, yet carried a price tag that could buy entire star systems. "Something's not right," muttered Krellix, Zartok's second-in-command. His exoskeletal fingers traced the holographic details, mandibles clicking with a nervous rhythm that betrayed his typically unflappable nature. "No single human commander is worth this much." Zartok's compound eyes narrowed, reflecting the swirling holographic data. The contract came from an anonymous source, routed through so many encrypted channels that even the Syndicate's most advanced decryption systems had struggled to trace its origin. 6 separate quantum firewalls, 17 alternative communication routes. Each layer added another level of complexity that should have been impossible. The team assembled represented the absolute pinnacle of galactic assassination expertise. There was Veline, a shape-shifting operative from the methane worlds of the Crimson Nebula, capable of molecular restructuring that allowed her to become virtually undetectable. Krellix himself was a tactical genius, with a neural implant that could process combat scenarios faster than most species could blink. Sorn, the team's heavy weapons specialist, carried enough firepower to obliterate a small moon. And then there was Zartok, a veteran of 100 successful missions. He had toppled governments, eliminated entire ruling classes, and crushed resistance movements across hundreds of star systems. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, primitive, predictable, and ultimately inconsequential. The preliminary intelligences, unusual, said the team's data specialist, a silicon-based life form whose crystalline body shifted with each data projection. Holographic images of Epsilon Prime flickered to life, a frontier colony that seemed almost laughably basic by galactic standards. Agricultural sectors, modest military installations, infrastructure that looked decades behind the technological curve of most spacefaring civilizations. Yet something about the data felt off. The contract specified total elimination of the human military leadership, complete and absolute. No survivors, no witnesses, total erasure. "Standard elimination protocol," Krellix commented, but there was a hesitation in his voice that surprised even himself. Zartok studied the images of Colonel Reese, a human female, mid-40s, with piercing green eyes and a facial expression that suggested something more dangerous than mere military training. Her personnel file was unusually sparse, a red flag that would have made a lesser team pause. But the Syndicate did not pause. The Syndicate did not hesitate. "Preliminary insertion point will be the colony's western agricultural sector," Veline announced, her voice a liquid purr that could modulate across multiple communication spectrums. "Minimal security. Perfect infiltration zone." The team began to review the mission parameters. Holographic terrain maps materialized, showing Epsilon Prime's geographical layout, topographical analysis, communication grid projections, supply line routes. Each detail was meticulously examined, each potential variable calculated with ruthless precision. Yet none of them noticed the subtle anomaly in the data, a microscopic pattern buried so deep in the mission parameters that it would take computational power beyond even the Syndicate's most advanced systems to detect. Something was waiting for them, something that didn't follow any known rules of engagement. Zartok felt a vibration, not from the communication array, not from the ship's systems, but a visceral sensation that crawled along his neural pathways, a warning that this mission would be different. "Prepare for deployment," he commanded, his voice cutting through the pre-mission preparations like a plasma blade. Little did they know, Humanity was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The quantum stealth ship glided silently through the outer atmospheric layers of Epsilon Prime, its advanced camouflage technology rendering it virtually undetectable. Veline's shape-shifting abilities provided an additional layer of concealment, her molecular structure adapting to mask any potential energy signatures that might betray their presence. Krelix monitored the initial sensor suites, his neural implant processing vast amounts of data in milliseconds. Primary reconnaissance drone launched, he reported, his voice a low, mechanical buzz that resonated through the ship's communication systems. The drone was a marvel of galactic engineering. Smaller than a human fist, it carried sensor arrays that could penetrate multiple electromagnetic spectrums, capture thermal signatures through quantum entanglement, and transmit data through encrypted quantum channels that were theoretically unbreakable. Theoretically. First anomaly detected, the ship's computational system announced. The voice was neutral, but there was something underneath, a subtle vibration that might have been confusion. The drone's primary sensor array began to experience inexplicable interference, not the standard background radiation or atmospheric disturbances that typically challenged advanced technology. This was different, targeted, precise. Recalibrating, Krelix muttered, his fingers dancing across quantum interface panels. But something was wrong. The drone's systems were being systematically isolated, its communication channels slowly and methodically blocked. Veline shifted her molecular structure, extending sensory tendrils into the ship's primary systems. "I'm detecting a pattern," she said, her voice suddenly sharp with concentration. "It's not random interference. Someone is actively hunting our reconnaissance systems." Zartok moved closer to the primary viewing panel. The holographic display showed the surface of Epsilon Prime, a seemingly mundane frontier colony that now looked anything but ordinary. Agricultural sectors stretched out in neat, geometric patterns. Modest military installations dotted the landscape. Nothing suggested the technological sophistication required to compromise their advanced stealth systems. "Second drone," Krelix commanded, launching another reconnaissance unit. This drone was different. Equipped with advanced quantum scrambling capabilities, it should have been impossible to track or interfere with. It deployed a multi-layered stealth field that could theoretically hide it from even the most advanced detection systems. It disappeared within 17 seconds of launch. "Impossible," Veline hissed, her molecular structure momentarily destabilizing, a rare display of emotion for her species. On the surface of Epsilon Prime, Colonel Emily Reese watched the tactical display with a calculated smile. "They're using standard infiltration protocols," she told her tactical team. Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez stood beside her, a holographic interface dancing across his augmented reality display. "Shall we give them a proper welcome?" Rodriguez asked, his finger hovering over a complex sequence of quantum communication protocols. The human military team had been preparing for this moment, not just for days or weeks, but for months. Every sensor, every defensive system, every communication channel was a carefully laid trap. Sorn, the team's heavy weapons specialist, began to grow agitated. "We're losing sensor coverage," he reported, his massive frame tensing with an unfamiliar sensation, something close to fear. Zartok's compound eyes tracked the rapidly changing tactical display. Something was very wrong. Their most advanced reconnaissance technologies were being systematically neutralized by a military installation that, by all previous intelligence, shouldn't have been capable of such technological sophistication. A third drone launched, this one carrying advanced quantum disruption capabilities designed to break through any potential interference. It lasted less than 10 seconds before going dark. "They're not just blocking our systems," Krelix said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "They're learning from each attempt, adapting." Veline's molecular structure began to ripple with something that, in another species, might have been called anxiety. "This is not possible," she repeated, more to herself than to the team. Zartok remained silent. His centuries of experience told him something fundamental had changed. These humans were not just defending, they were hunting. And the hunt had only just begun. On the surface of Epsilon Prime, Colonel Reese turned to her team. "Prepare full-spectrum response," she commanded. "Let's show them why humans are not to be underestimated." The communication intercept hit like a quantum shockwave. Zartok watched in mounting horror as personal histories, deeply buried secrets, and classified mission records began streaming across every communication channel. The Syndicate's most secure encryption protocols, systems that had remained unbreached for centuries, crumbled like ancient parchment. Krelix's neural implant went into emergency shutdown, unable to process the psychological assault. His most shameful mission failure, a botched assassination on the methane world of Cranax Prime, where an entire team had been eliminated due to his strategic miscalculation, played out in excruciating detail. The transmission included intercepted personal communications, psychological evaluation reports, and even encrypted personal logs that should have been impossible to access. Valine's molecular structure began to destabilize. Her own hidden truth emerged, a genetic mutation that made her fundamentally different from her species' standard profile, a secret that would have rendered her an outcast if discovered. Holographic displays showed classified genetic reports, personal correspondence with forbidden genetic therapists, the entire tapestry of her most guarded personal history laid bare. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice fracturing like broken glass. On the surface of Epsilon Prime, Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez managed the psychological warfare operation with surgical precision. Each piece of intercepted information was carefully curated, transformed from mere data into a weapon designed to break the assassin's spirit. Colonel Emily Reese watched the tactical displays, her green eyes calculating. "Psychological integrity is just another system to be hacked," she told her team. "And we're very good at finding vulnerabilities." The humans had done more than simply intercept communications. They had reconstructed entire psychological profiles, understanding not just the facts of the assassins' lives, but the emotional landscapes that shaped their experiences. Each transmission was a precisely crafted psychological weapon. Sorn, the team's heavy weapons specialist, found his own history exposed. His previous missions were not the clean, professional operations he had believed them to be. Intercepted communications revealed collateral damage, civilian casualties that had been carefully hidden from official reports. The holographic displays showed detailed accounts of entire settlements, destroyed as side effects of his precision missions. The Syndicate's communication networks began to fail catastrophically. What had begun as a simple reconnaissance mission was transforming into a total systemic breakdown. Zartok realized they were facing something entirely unprecedented. These humans weren't just fighting a physical battle. They were waging war on a psychological level that defied all known combat doctrines. Each transmission was designed not just to inform, but to destabilize, to create maximum psychological impact. "We're being deconstructed," Krelix muttered, his voice a broken whisper. The neural implant that had been his greatest advantage now felt like a liability, each circuit a potential pathway for psychological invasion. The human team worked with terrifying efficiency. Lieutenant Rodriguez coordinated a multi-layered assault that went beyond traditional information warfare. They weren't just exposing secrets, they were reconstructing entire psychological profiles, understanding the deepest fears and vulnerabilities of each team member. Valine's molecular structure continued to destabilize. The exposure of her genetic mutation meant more than just personal embarrassment. It threatened her entire future within her species. Holographic displays showed potential genetic tribunal hearings, exile proceedings, the complete unraveling of her carefully constructed identity. Sorn found himself paralyzed by the weight of exposed truths. His missions, which he had always considered precise and necessary, were now revealed in their full brutal complexity. Civilian casualties, destroyed ecosystems, entire planetary cultures disrupted by what he had believed were surgical interventions. The communication assault continued. Personal messages, psychological evaluation records, mission logs, Nothing was sacred. Nothing was secure. Zartok watched his team begin to fracture. This was not just an attack. It was a systematic deconstruction of everything they believed about themselves, their missions, their very identities. "We are not fighting soldiers," Zartok transmitted to the remaining team members, his voice a mixture of warning and something close to respect. "We are facing a tactical approach that goes beyond anything in our computational models." On the surface of Epsilon Prime, Colonel Reese allowed herself a small, calculating smile. The first phase of their defense was working perfectly. The hunt was just beginning. Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez stood before a holographic display that would have been incomprehensible to most species in the galaxy. Quantum computational matrices danced across multiple dimensional planes, each algorithm a living, breathing entity that adapted faster than thought itself. Predictive combat modeling, he explained to Captain James Henderson, is more than just calculating probabilities. It's about understanding the fundamental nature of tactical engagement. The human technological suite defied everything the Syndicate assassins understood about warfare. What appeared to be simple sensor arrays were actually complex quantum entanglement networks that could track targets across multiple dimensional spectrums. Adaptive camouflage systems made their stealth technologies look like primitive child's play. Zartok watched in mounting horror as their most advanced infiltration technologies were systematically neutralized. The quantum stealth ship, a marvel of galactic engineering that had remained undetected through hundreds of missions, began to feel like a transparent bubble, every system exposed and vulnerable. Valine's molecular restructuring abilities, which had made her the most effective infiltrator in the Syndicate, suddenly seemed limited. The humans had developed detection systems that could track molecular shifts at a quantum level, rendering her shape-changing capabilities virtually useless. Computational tracking, Rodriguez demonstrated, isn't about seeing where something is. It's about predicting where it will be before it knows itself. A holographic display showed multiple potential movement paths for the Syndicate team. Not just probable paths, but every conceivable path, calculated with terrifying precision. Red lines indicated potential interception points. Blue lines showed escape routes that would be systematically blocked before they could be utilized. Krulix's neural implant, once the most advanced tactical system in the galaxy, began to overheat. The human computational systems were feeding it conflicting data streams, each more complex than the last. It was a form of technological warfare that went beyond simple signal jamming or electronic countermeasures. "We're dealing with a living computational ecosystem," Colonel Emily Reese explained to her tactical team. "Every system is adaptive. Every sensor is both a weapon and a learning tool." The weapons systems were equally incomprehensible. What appeared to be simple targeting arrays were actually multi-dimensional computational networks that could predict and neutralize threats before they'd fully materialized. Defensive systems that could reshape local gravitational fields. Communication networks that could instantaneously reroute and protect themselves from any form of intrusion. Sorn, the team's heavy weapons specialist, found his most advanced plasma cannons rendered completely ineffective. Targeting systems that could predict weapon discharge trajectories. Defensive shields that could instantaneously adapt to any form of energy projection. Technological superiority is about more than just advanced systems, Rodriguez told Henderson. It's about creating an ecosystem of technological adaptation. Holographic displays showed layers of technological complexity that seemed to defy known physical laws. Quantum communication channels that could transmit information faster than light. Gravitational manipulation systems that could create localized protective fields. Adaptive camouflage that could change at the molecular level faster than any tracking system could detect. The Syndicate ship's most advanced sensors began to fail, not through direct interference, but through a systematic deconstruction of their entire technological framework. Each system was being studied, understood, and neutralized with surgical precision. Valine's molecular sensors detected something impossible. The humans were creating localized quantum field manipulations that could predict and neutralize molecular restructuring at a fundamental level. Her most advanced infiltration techniques were being rendered completely ineffective. "They're not just defending," Zartok muttered, watching the tactical display with growing dread. "They're completely redesigning the fundamental nature of technological engagement." Krelix's neural implant continued to overheat, struggling to process the complexity of human technological approaches. Each computational pathway was a living, breathing entity that adapted faster than thought itself. Traditional tactical modeling became useless in the face of such adaptive complexity. On the surface of Epsilon Prime, the human military team worked with a level of technological synchronization that seemed almost organic. Each system was connected, each sensor a part of a larger, living computational organism. "Prepare full spectrum response," Colonel Reese commanded. The technological nightmare was just beginning. The landscape of Epsilon Prime transformed into a living weapon. Colonel Emily Reese had redesigned the entire planetary infrastructure as a comprehensive hunting ground. What appeared to be simple agricultural sectors became intricate tactical zones. Seemingly innocent terrain features were now complex environmental manipulation systems that could shift, adapt, and neutralize threats in milliseconds. Veline was the first to experience the full horror of the human hunting strategy. Her molecular restructuring abilities had always been her primary survival mechanism. Shake-shift, blend, disappear. Tactics that had worked perfectly through hundreds of missions suddenly became catastrophically ineffective. The ground itself began to move. Quantum-embedded sensors detected her molecular shifts before she could complete them. Gravitational field generators created localized zones that prevented molecular restructuring. What should have been a simple camouflage technique became a deadly trap. "Terrain is not just a location," Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez explained to Captain James Henderson. "It's a weapon system." Geological structures began to respond to Veline's movements. Molecular-level sensors tracked her quantum signature. Rock formations shifted. Vegetation became dense, immobilizing barriers. The entire planetary surface seemed to be a living, breathing hunting mechanism designed specifically to neutralize her capabilities. Zartok watched the tactical display with growing horror. Veline's quantum signature began to destabilize. Her molecular structure, once her greatest advantage, was being systematically broken down by environmental systems that seemed to anticipate her every potential movement. Krelix's neural implant worked overtime, trying to calculate potential escape routes. But each potential path was already blocked. Predictive computational systems had mapped every conceivable movement before it could be initiated. "We're not just being hunted," Krelix transmitted to the remaining team members. "We're being systematically deconstructed." Zorn attempted to deploy heavy weapon systems, plasma cannons that had obliterated entire military installations in previous missions found themselves neutralized before they could even charge. Localized electromagnetic fields created by the planetary infrastructure immediately dissipated energy weapon signatures. Gravitational manipulation systems redirected weapon trajectories milliseconds after initiation. The humans had turned the entire planet into a comprehensive hunting mechanism. Agricultural sectors that appeared mundane were actually complex sensor networks. What looked like simple irrigation systems were quantum-entangled communication arrays. Even the planetary atmosphere had been modified to create localized tracking fields that could detect molecular shifts at unprecedented resolutions. Veline's final transmission was a quantum burst of pure terror. Her molecular structure began to break down, tracked and neutralized by systems that seemed to understand her biology at a fundamental level. "Target neutralized," Lieutenant Rodriguez reported with clinical precision. Zartok realized they were facing a form of warfare that went beyond traditional combat strategies. The humans weren't just defending. They were hunting with a level of precision and technological sophistication that defied all known galactic combat doctrines. Zorn became the next target. His massive frame, which had been a weapon in countless missions, became a liability. Terrain manipulation systems created gravitational zones that made movement increasingly difficult. Sensor networks tracked his quantum signature with terrifying accuracy. Adaptive environmental warfare. Colonel Reese explained to her tactical team. Every sector is a potential kill zone. The planetary surface seemed to breathe with a living intelligence. Geological structures shifted. Electromagnetic fields created invisible barriers. Quantum-entangled sensor networks tracked every potential movement with impossible precision. Krelix watched the tactical display, his neural implant struggling to process the complexity of the human hunting strategy. Traditional tactical modeling became useless. The humans had created a planetary hunting mechanism that was simultaneously a defensive system, a communication network, and a weapon. "We are not fighting soldiers," Zartok transmitted to the remaining team member. "We are facing a living, tactical organism." On the surface of Epsilon Prime, the hunt continued. And the humans were just getting started. Zartok's compound eyes tracked the rapidly deteriorating tactical display. 2 of his most elite team members had been systematically eliminated, and the mission was unraveling with terrifying speed. Krelix sat motionless, his neural implant smoking slightly from the continuous computational assault. The human tactical systems had done more than just defeat their technology. They had fundamentally dismantled everything the Syndicate believed about warfare, about survival, about strategic engagement. "We need to retreat," Krelix finally transmitted, his voice a broken whisper that carried the weight of absolute defeat. But retreat was no longer an option. The communication networks that had once been the Syndicate's greatest advantage now worked against them. Every transmission was a potential vector for detection. Every quantum burst of information could be traced, analyzed, and used as a weapon. The humans had transformed communication itself into a hunting mechanism. Colonel Emily Reese watched the tactical display with a calculating precision that went beyond military training. This was more than a defensive operation. This was a comprehensive deconstruction of an entire tactical approach. Psychological warfare is about more than just exposing information, she explained to Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez. It's about demonstrating the fundamental inadequacy of an opponent's entire operational methodology. Zartok understood now what they were truly facing. These humans weren't just technologically advanced. They had developed a form of warfare that was simultaneously biological, technological, and psychological. Every system was adaptive. Every sensor was a potential weapon. The entire planetary infrastructure had become a living, breathing hunting mechanism. The remaining Syndicate ships' quantum stealth systems began to fail catastrophically. Localized gravitational manipulations created interference patterns that made traditional cloaking technologies useless. Quantum entanglement networks tracked their every potential movement before they could even initiate it. "We're dealing with a species that doesn't just fight," Zartok transmitted to Krelix. "They fundamentally redesigned the nature of conflict itself." Lieutenant Rodriguez demonstrated the full extent of their tracking capabilities. Holographic displays showed multiple potential movement paths for the remaining Syndicate operatives. Not just probable paths, but every conceivable path of escape, each already neutralized before it could be initiated. The planetary surface of Epsilon Prime was no longer just a location. It was a comprehensive weapon system. Krelix's neural implant began to break down. The continuous computational assault had pushed it beyond its design limitations. What had once been his greatest advantage, a tactical system that could process combat scenarios faster than most species could think, was now a liability that was literally burning itself out. "Total system failure is imminent," the ship's computational system announced with clinical precision. Zartok watched as their last remaining extraction protocols were systematically dismantled. Communication channels, quantum burst transmission systems, emergency beacon technologies. Each system was being tracked, understood, and neutralized with surgical precision. The humans had done more than just defend against an attack. They had created a comprehensive system that could predict, neutralize, and completely destroy any potential threat before it could fully materialize. "We are facing a tactical approach that goes beyond anything in our computational models," Zartok transmitted, his voice a mixture of professional assessment and something closer to respect. Colonel Reese allowed herself a small, calculated smile. Demonstrate, she told her tactical team, that we are not just defenders. We are hunters. The planetary infrastructure began to shift. Gravitational manipulation systems created localized zones that made movement increasingly difficult. Quantum-entangled sensor networks tracked their quantum signature with terrifying accuracy. What appeared to be simple terrain features became complex environmental manipulation systems that could shift, adapt, and neutralize threats in milliseconds. Krellix's final transmission was a quantum burst of pure computational despair. His neural implant had become a liability, each circuit a potential pathway for total system destruction. Target tracking complete, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported. On the surface of Epsilon Prime, the hunt was entering its final phase, and the humans were just getting started. The final confrontation began not with a dramatic explosion, but with absolute silence. Zartok and Krellix found themselves in a containment zone that defied every known principle of spatial manipulation. The terrain around them shifted with mathematical precision, not random, but calculated down to the quantum level. Each movement they attempted was anticipated, countered, neutralized before it could fully manifest. "This is not combat," Krellix transmitted, his neural implant flickering with its final computational bursts. "This is complete deconstruction." Colonel Emily Reese stood in the command center, her green eyes tracking multiple holographic displays that showed the assassins every potential movement. Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez worked beside her, a living computational interface that seemed to breathe with tactical possibility. "Demonstrate total system neutralization," Reese commanded. The planetary infrastructure responded like a living organism. Gravitational fields created localized zones of extreme pressure. Electromagnetic manipulations generated interference patterns that disrupted molecular cohesion. The very ground became a weapon system more sophisticated than any traditional military technology. Zartok's six-limbed body fought against environmental systems that seemed to understand his biological structure at a fundamental level. Quantum-embedded sensors tracked his molecular shifts with impossible precision. Terrain features transformed, creating barriers that anticipated his movements milliseconds before he could initiate them. "Computational tracking is more than observation," Rodriguez explained to Captain James Henderson. "It's about understanding the fundamental nature of potential movement." Holographic displays showed multiple potential paths of engagement. Red lines indicated blocked escape routes. Blue lines demonstrated potential human interception vectors. Every conceivable tactical scenario had already been calculated, understood, and neutralized. Krellix's neural implant made one final desperate attempt to calculate an escape route, but each potential path was already blocked by adaptive systems that could reshape gravitational fields, manipulate electromagnetic interference, and create localized environmental barriers faster than thought itself. The humans had transformed an entire planetary ecosystem into a comprehensive weapon system. What appeared to be simple agricultural sectors were actually complex sensor networks. Irrigation systems became quantum-entangled communication arrays. Even the planetary atmosphere had been modified to create tracking fields that could detect molecular shifts at unprecedented resolutions. "Total system neutralization," Rodriguez reported with clinical precision. Zartok realized they were facing a form of warfare that went beyond any known galactic combat doctrine. The humans weren't just defending. They were systematically deconstructing the entire operational methodology of the most advanced assassination team in the galaxy. Environmental manipulation systems created zones of extreme gravitational pressure. Molecular-level sensors tracked quantum signatures with terrifying accuracy. The entire planetary surface seemed to breathe with a living intelligence that understood conflict at a fundamental level. "We are not fighting soldiers," Zartok transmitted in his final communication. "We are facing a living, tactical organism that understands conflict as a computational ecosystem." Colonel Reese watched the final moments of the confrontation with a calculated calmness that went beyond traditional military training. This was more than a defensive operation. This was a comprehensive demonstration of a fundamentally different approach to warfare. Krelix's neural implant made its final computational burst, a quantum transmission of pure tactical despair. Every system had been anticipated. Every potential movement had been calculated and neutralized before it could fully manifest. The terrain itself became the final weapon. Gravitational manipulation systems created localized zones that immobilized the remaining syndicate operatives. Quantum-entangled sensor networks tracked their quantum signatures with impossible precision. Molecular-level environmental systems began to break down their physical structures. Mission complete, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported. On the surface of Epsilon Prime, the hunt reached its final conclusion. The Syndicate had learned a brutal lesson about the nature of human warfare, and humanity was just getting started. The transmission spread faster than light itself. In the dark corners of interstellar taverns, criminal networks, and Syndicate communication channels, the story of Epsilon Prime began to circulate, not as a rumor, not as a potential threat, but as an absolute, terrifying reality that would reshape galactic power dynamics forever. The Galactic Syndicate's central communications hub went into complete lockdown. Emergency protocols that had remained untouched for centuries activated simultaneously. Holographic displays across multiple star systems showed the comprehensive defeat of their most elite assassination team, a team that had never failed a mission in 300 years. Colonel Emily Reese filed her official report with clinical precision. Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez stood beside her, reviewing the tactical data that would soon become required study for military academies across human space. They were not just an assassination team, Reese noted in her report. They were a comprehensive demonstration of the most advanced infiltration technologies in the known galaxy. And they had been completely neutralized. The economic implications began to ripple outward almost immediately. Assassination contracts against human targets became prohibitively expensive. Entire criminal networks began to reassess their operational methodologies. The cost of attempting to target human military or political leadership became astronomical, not just in financial terms, but in potential systemic destruction. Captain James Henderson reviewed the tactical analysis with a mixture of professional pride and scientific curiosity. The humans had done more than just defend. They had demonstrated a fundamental reimagining of warfare, communication, and technological engagement. We didn't just defeat an assassination team, Henderson observed. We demonstrated an entirely new approach to conflict resolution. The surviving members of the Galactic Syndicate convened an emergency session. Holographic representations of leadership from multiple star systems watched the comprehensive report in stunned silence. The tactical data was undeniable. A single human frontier colony had completely dismantled the most sophisticated assassination team in galactic history. Zartok's final transmission became a legendary document. His acknowledgement of defeat, a quantum burst of pure tactical assessment, was studied, analyzed, and discussed in military and criminal networks across hundreds of star systems. We are not fighting soldiers, the transmission read. We are facing a living, tactical organism that understands conflict at a fundamental level beyond traditional computational models. Economic markets began to shift. Defensive technology contracts for human-designed systems became the most valuable commodities in the galaxy. Military academies across multiple species began to completely redesign their tactical training methodologies. The humans had done more than win a single confrontation. They had fundamentally changed the understanding of warfare itself. Lieutenant Rodriguez continued to analyze the tactical data. Each piece of information revealed layers of complexity that went beyond traditional military engagement. The planetary infrastructure of Epsilon Prime had become a living weapon system. Communication networks, environmental manipulation, quantum-level tracking systems. This is not just a defensive strategy, Rodriguez explained to the research team. This is a comprehensive reimagining of conflict resolution. Criminal networks began to implement comprehensive avoidance protocols for human-controlled territories. The risk had become too great. The potential for total systemic destruction was absolute. Colonel Reese allowed herself a moment of reflection. This was more than a military victory. This was a comprehensive demonstration of human adaptability, technological innovation, and strategic thinking. The final report was distributed across human military and diplomatic channels, not as a boast, not as a demonstration of power, but as a clinical assessment of a new approach to conflict. Epsilon Prime became more than a frontier colony. It became a symbol of human potential. In the dark corners of interstellar bars, a new phrase began to circulate, a warning, a legend, a fundamental reassessment of galactic power dynamics. Beware the humans, and humanity was just getting started.